The following information is taken from an article titled, or a book or pamphlet perhaps, National Economy and the Banking System of the United States, an exposition of the principles of modern monetary science in their relation to the national economy and the banking system of the United States. And this is from Robert L. Owen, former chairman, Committee on Banking and Currency, United States Senate. I suppose it was presented at the 76th Congress, first session, document number 28. Okay, now you see the credentialing of it. You see who it's coming from. This is a fantastic source of information on the institution that is money. It is principally centered around it. It is principally centered around the discussion of the generation of debt through modern day currency. So I want to just read a few quotes, pretty popular quotes on this subject that come from out of this document. So a few quotations of notable leaders. Benjamin Franklin, on being asked in Great Britain how he accounted for the prosperous condition of the colonies, said, "That is simple. It is only because in the colonies we issue our money. It is called colonial scrip, and we issue it in the proper proportion to the demand of trade and industry." It was not very long until this information was brought to the Rothschilds' bank, and they saw that here was a nation that was ready to be exploited. Here was a nation that had been setting up example that they could issue their own money in place of the money coming through the banks. So the Rothschild Bank caused a bill to be introduced in the English Parliament, which provided that no colony of England could issue their own money. They had to use English money. Consequently, the colonies were compelled to discard their scrip and mortgage themselves to the Bank of England in order to get money. For the first time in the history of the United States, our money began to be based on debt. Benjamin Franklin stated that in 1 year from that date, the streets of the colonies were filled with the unemployed, because when England exchanged with them, she gave the colonies only half as many units of payment and borrowed money from the Rothschild Bank as they had in scrip. In other words, their circulating medium was reduced to 50%, and everyone became unemployed. The poor houses became filled, according to Benjamin Franklin's own statement. Mr. Franklin went further than that. He said that this was the original cause of the Revolutionary War. In his own language, the colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. And it's very interesting how far back this conversation on central banking, revolving around the Rothschilds, no less, the commissioners of the original Bavarian Illuminati, not the Illuminati in totality, but the Bavarian faction of it. It's interesting just how far back this conversation goes. As narrated by Honorable C.G. Binderup in a speech on the floor of the House of Representatives, 75th Congress, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." And that was quoting Mayor Anselm Rothschild, 1790. John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1787, "All the perplexities, confusion, and distress in America arise not from defects in the Constitution or Confederation, not from want of honor or virtue so much as from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation." Thomas Jefferson said, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a moneyed aristocracy that has set the government at defiance. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people, to whom it properly belongs." Ricardo says that commodities rise or fall in proportion to the increase or diminution of money. I assume as a fact that is incontrovertible. Andrew Jackson said, "If Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given them to be used by themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or to corporations." Adam Smith, called the father of political economy, said, "Money measures things and things measure money. Each measures the other by and according to its own abundance, by comparison. If you double the volume of money in circulation, you double the price of everything. By doubling the price, you divide the debt, because it takes only half as much labor or the products of labor to pay the same debt. If you divide the amount of money in circulation, you divide the price of everything. By dividing the price of everything, you double your debts, for it will take twice as much labor or the products of labor to pay the same debt. John Stuart Mill tells us that an increase of the quantity of money raises prices and a diminution lowers them is the most elementary proposition in the theory of currency, and without it we should have no key to any of the others. The few who can understand the system, check money and credits, will either be so interested in its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class, while on the other hand, the great body of the people mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from the system will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests. From a letter written by the Rothschild brothers of London, England, to a New York firm of bankers, June 25th, 1863. And then he repeats that. From a letter written by the Rothschild brothers of London, England, to a New York firm of bankers, June 25th, 1863. The few who can understand the system, check money and credits, will either be so interested in its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class, while on the other hand, the great body of the people, mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from the system, will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests. Alright, so this is, again, and then I want to hit off with this one. Woodrow Wilson, 1916, said, "A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men." So, interestingly, the first time that I really got turned on to any of this stuff was actually in regards to the Federal Reserve and the Bavarian Illuminati. There was a dude named Elihu Palmer that I had read about, and that's how I found out about the Illuminati, because I found out about correspondence between this individual, Elihu Palmer, and between either him. Oh, here it is, Thomas Jefferson. There it is right there. Elihu Palmer to Thomas Jefferson, National Archives. That was convenient. So this individual was said to be basically like the head of the Columbian or the Clintonian faction of the Illuminati. And that was the first time that I had ever heard about any of that. But it was from a song. It's a metal song. It's one of my favorite songs. It's the Columbian Faction by Volumes. And the song starts off with the quote from Woodrow Wilson, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now destroyed by its system of credit." At that point in time, a few years back, I didn't understand any of this shit. And it's really that realization that the Illuminati wasn't something that was just in movies, but it was real. And that there was, this profound quote that I understood nothing about that drove me to learn more about all of this, which has led me here. It's been a long, long road. Okay, so regarding the Ares failure, 1871, I've already discussed this before. I have a video on this. The Ares failure explained without propaganda. I already explained in that video the general premise, in that the reason that Ares failure seems to indicate a stationary Earth, aside from like everyday, life, like literally every single thing that you do throughout your life that indicates that you're stationary until you're not, right? The reason that Airy's failure seems to indicate it as an experiment is that there was what they were trying to detect as an increase in the aberration of light due to a earlier experiment by an individual. It was a Fizeau and Fresnel. The Fizeau experiment. So, an earlier experiment had deduced that you could detect a alteration in the fringe patterns of light due to a moving medium, right? And this is what was called the partial aether drag hypothesis, and it was demonstrated to be true, which is why the partial aether drag, the equations associated with it, are still used today, even though they have supposedly dropped the ether from the entirety of modern academia. They still use these equations. Right? So Airy's failure was, it seemed to indicate a stationary Earth because they already proved that if a moving medium, that if a medium was moving, such as water, that it would so-called entrain the ether, and that you would detect an alteration in the aberration of light. So when the Airy's failure failed to do that by introducing water into the telescope, the most obvious indicator would be that it's not moving. But really the only reason that I brought this up is because I want to point out just how contradictory the entirety of modern cosmology is. I mean, it's so utterly frustrating listening to people that are completely entranced within the system and that don't have any of these insights or understandings. Because, I mean, they're not easy to obtain, right? But it's incredibly frustrating just how intelligent these people feel themselves to be and how absurd the entire system is as a whole. The aberration of light, which I've discussed in multiple videos now, that theory, which was established by James Bradley, it depended completely upon the aether hypothesis, not the partial aether drag, but the aether itself. The aberration of light was formulated on the idea of the ether. The aberration of light is still an experiment that is used today, or a concept that is prevalent in modern astrophysics today. It was based on the ether. Now then, the partial ether drag hypothesis, the equations of which are still used today, are obviously based on the ether. So these fucking idiots, right? This is why I said in that Airy's failure video prior, I was like, they can't make up their minds. They don't know what they're talking about. They are so utterly confused because none of their physics models actually hold up with reality. But they've already been caught in this loop of circular reasoning because they've been shown videos and videos and videos and photos from NASA and whatever space agency, so that they already think they know what's going on. So they don't really give a shit what any of this says. They're going to fill in the gaps mentally to match with that image that they've been presenting. None of this adds up, right? The aberration of light, it's assuming the motion of the Earth. It's assuming that light has a finite speed, but even worse, it's based on the ether theory, or at least was, which they no longer use. Which is like the entirety of the Airy's failure is based on this notion of the ether and partial aether drag and so on and so forth. But they'll indicate that the Airy's failure indicated that the Earth was moving. It's like, not only did it not indicate that, right? It indicated the opposite, but it's also based on ideas that heliocentrists they don't even use anymore. So they say here, his results, and this is in regard to the partial aether drag hypothesis of Augustin Jean Fresnel, the Fizeau experiment carried out by Hippolyte Fizeau in 1851, his results seemingly supported the partial aether drag hypothesis of Augustin Jean Fresnel, a situation that was disconcerting to most physicists, Over half a century passed before a satisfactory explanation of Fizeau's unexpected measurement was developed. With the advent of Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity, oh fucking boy, Einstein later pointed out the importance of the experiment for special relativity, because this is what they do, right? They take everything that doesn't match with their theory, and then they fucking blatantly lie about it, and they say, look, this is a particularly striking example. Einstein later pointed out the importance of the experiment for special relativity, in which it corresponds to the relativistic velocity addition formula. So what is that? In relativistic physics, a velocity addition formula is an equation that specifies, it's exactly what it sounds like. It specifies how to combine the velocities of objects in a way that is consistent with the requirement that no object's speed can exceed the speed of light. Such formulas apply to successive Lorentz transformations. The Lorentz transformation was invoked specifically as a result of having to deny and explain away the results of the Michelson-Morley test. You starting to see the pattern here? Another test that indicated that the Earth was not moving. Right? So what they're saying is that they've used the same methodology to rewrite the history of these experiments and to reinterpret them by quite literally altering space and time through the use of mathematics, because that is exactly what these equations do. They literally, mathematically, alter time and space to reinterpret the results. Okay? That is how fucking insane modern physics has become. You know, instead of, let's see, instead of simply accepting the results as they are, these people have been trained since childhood to believe in symbols of math that rewrite reality. Instead of just looking at that, you see that necklace right there? Instead of just looking at that and saying, well, I'm very obviously not moving, right? Like, I'm definitely not spiraling at millions of miles per hour, different directions and circular motions. They've been trained to not understand what that means. Something so profound, so simple. Also, one of the main symbols of Freemasonry, not that in particular, but the plumb bob. A motionless plumb bob, right? Level, motionless. Alright, that's all I got. Much love.